This was a story about a person who was extremely sick, who was brought into the hospital, and according to the medical report, this person had a fungus growing in their blood. And this wasn't just some random airborne fungus that nobody's ever heard of, or some case of athlete's foot gone wrong. This was actually Psilocybe cubensis, or the most commonly used species of magic mushroom. Spoiler alert, the headlines from this story, and there were lots of them, were mostly clickbait and kind of just an overly enthusiastic misrepresentation of the facts. Kind of like this one here, which says a man injected himself with magic mushrooms and the fungi grew in his blood, which put him into organ failure. Of course, they have this photo of Psilocybe cubensis. This is like the most widely used stock photo of all time. It seems like every article about this mushroom seems to use it. I kind of love that. So here's the basics. A 30-year-old man with bipolar disorder injected himself with magic mushrooms, which contain psilocybin, in a failed attempt at a trip. Psychedelic mushrooms are meant to be eaten or drunk, not injected. That's true. The mushroom grew in the man's bloodstream and caused his body to go into organ failure. This is the part that was like really surprising. The mushroom grew in the man's bloodstream. That's what got everybody's attention. He's being treated with long-term use of antifungals and antibiotics. So if we go over the article here, it talks about the background. Basically, he made a tea with the mushrooms and then instead of drinking the tea, injected it into his veins. It goes on a little bit about the history and kind of why he was trying to treat himself with psilocybin. And also talks a little bit about how, some of the research that's being done on psilocybin for some of these things. But here's another headline that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Doctors found mushrooms growing in the man's bloodstream. So with that kind of a headline, you picture like fruiting bodies growing inside of somebody somehow, which is a great headline. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Even this part here, it says a blood sample revealed something even more shocking. The mushrooms, which thrive in dark places, which the inside of us would be pretty dark, had begun to grow in the man's bloodstream, causing the aforementioned health issues. So again, if you know anything about how mushrooms grow, this article would kind of leave you with a lot of questions. You might be thinking, okay, well, maybe his blood acted like a nutrient-rich broth and somehow the spores were able to sporulate and his blood became like kind of a liquid culture and there was mycelium growing inside of him. That would still be pretty crazy, but definitely wouldn't have mushroom fruiting bodies growing inside of them. Now here is the actual scientific paper, or I guess it's a pre-journal proof called A Trip to the Intensive Care Unit, an intravenous injection of psilocybin. But this is the part that got all the headlines. It says here, cultures confirmed both bacterial and fungal infections. And for the fungal infections, it says ultimately cultured and DNA identified by a specialist as Psilocybe cubensis. In other words, the species of mushrooms he injected was now growing from his blood. So not growing in his blood, it was growing from his blood, and that's a super important distinction. So again, I highly doubt that he actually had mushrooms growing inside of him. What actually happened was he happened to have spores inside of his bloodstream because he injected them in there. The spores were able to survive, and when they cultured his blood out on a plate, those spores then sporulated, which was confirmed to be Psilocybe cubensis. This is still interesting to me for sure. Like, spores are super tenacious, and the fact that they could survive being made into a tea and then be injected intravenously. Some people say spores can even survive like space travel and all sorts of crazy conditions. That's just how mushrooms are able to reproduce and be around for so long. So that is pretty cool, but the real headline should have been something along the lines of spores from Psilocybe cubensis survived human intravenous injection, which is definitely not as good of a headline. Now, looking into this a little bit deeper, this whole idea of mycelium possibly growing inside of a living human, it has happened before. I found this paper about a coprinus species that was found to be growing in somebody, or at least the mycelium of a coprinus species that was growing inside of somebody. They were getting a heart valve replacement, and the surgeons found a thick filamentous fungus, otherwise known as mycelium, that was later found to be Coprinus cinereus, which is an inky cap mushroom that grows on lawns. And what's interesting here, and like why this is so notable, is because inky caps, which you've probably seen, they are considered a Basidiomycetes, which basically means a mushroom that produces a fruiting body, which would not be typical at all to have the ability to infect humans. So it says right here in the paper, Basidiomycetes have very rarely been implicated in human or animal disease, presumably mainly because of their inability to grow at 37 degrees Celsius, or the temperature inside of the human body. Basically, we are just too hot for mushrooms. Now, that was all well and good until I came across this other article that was just published, which was basically saying something along the lines of mushrooms are adapting to warmer temperatures, and that might increase their ability to be able to infect humans. Now, this article, dangerous fungi are spreading across the US as temperatures rise. Some fungi, such as the type that causes valley fever, might be adapting to endure more heat stress. This came out a couple days ago, like I said, off of the hype of The Last of Us. But to be honest, it doesn't really say much. It just kind of talks a lot about potential research or things that research might be suggesting or might be showing, and that maybe could have some potential to increase mushrooms' ability to infect humans. But again, I don't think there's too much of substance here. It's actually kind of a weirdly written article. It almost seems like it was written by AI or something like that. So for the record, well, first, nobody should be injecting psilocybin spores in their bloodstream, so let's get that out of the way. But nobody should be worried about mushrooms turning us all into zombies. Nobody should be worried about mushrooms growing inside of us, really, and nobody should be worried about mushrooms wiping out the human population anytime soon. This video was a clip from The Mushroom Show, which is the one place you need to be to stay on top of all the amazing things happening in the world of mushrooms. Click here to watch the full episode that this clip was taken from, and be sure to subscribe to our channel to catch the next release.